The first thing Kaelen heard was the ship groaning around them, a deep metallic sigh after centuries of silence. Artificial light stung his eyes as his cryopod hissed open, the air tasting of recycled metal and antiseptic. Around him, the other colonists stirred, their murmurs a confused chorus of hope and disorientation. Through the viewport, Elysium-7 hung like a perfect emerald against the velvet black, exactly as the mission brief had promised. Paradise, home, but something felt wrong, a vibration in the deck plates that shouldn't be there, a flicker in the main console that spoke of systems strained to their limit. While the others gazed in wonder, Kaelen's hands moved on instinct, pulling up the primary logs. And there it was, buried beneath layers of routine data, a single encrypted file, marked with a designation that chilled him more than cryo-sleep ever had. Project Chimera. The mission brief said nothing about a Project Chimera. His eyes darted from the green world outside to the warning on the screen, and in that moment he knew none of them had been told the truth. Something waited for them on Elysium-7, something the logs were desperate to hide. The atmosphere inside the landing shuttle was electric with a kind of breathless joy, the kind that comes after a journey spanning lifetimes. Cheers and excited chatter filled the cramped space as the craft descended through Elysium-7 atmosphere, the viewports offering a breathtaking panorama of lush green continents and sapphire blue oceans. It was more beautiful than any simulation. Kaelen, however, sat in silence, his knuckles white as he gripped his harness, the words Project Chimera echoing in his mind like a warning siren that only he could hear. The landing struts met the alien soil with a soft, final thud. The ramp hissed down, flooding the cabin with air that was startlingly fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and unfamiliar blossoms. One by one, the colonists stepped out into the light of their new sun, their boots sinking into the rich, dark soil of a world that was supposed to be their fresh start. There were tears, embraces, and a collective sigh of relief that was centuries in the making. It was a perfect moment, a historic first footfall. Amid the celebration, survey specialist Lyra went to work with practiced efficiency, her demeanor all business while everyone else marveled. She crouched down, pulling a core sampler from her pack and driving it into the ground. Her handheld scanner hummed as she analyzed the sample, its screen casting a pale blue light on her face. Her smile, which had been so bright moments before, slowly faded. She tapped the device, frowned, and ran the analysis again. "That's not right," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the celebratory noise. Kaelen was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" "The soil composition," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "It's all wrong. The spectrographic analysis shows trace elements and mineral ratios that are completely off the charts from our pre-mission planetary survey. This reads like a completely different biome. According to our data, this specific region should be nutrient poor, requiring years of treatment before it could support Earth flora. But this soil is almost too perfect. It's as if the terraforming was completed 1,000 years ago, not just initiated before we left." Kaelen's blood ran cold. He looked from Lyra's confused face to the verdant, impossible landscape around them. His mind connected the dots in a terrifying instant. The encrypted file, the strange ship systems, the pristine world that defied all their projections. He leaned close to her, his voice a low, urgent whisper meant for her ears alone. The terraforming reports were falsified. The words hung in the air between them, a truth so devastating it felt like a physical blow. And as if the planet itself had heard his accusation and decided to answer, the ground beneath their feet gave a sudden, violent lurch. It wasn't a natural tremor, the gentle shift of a living world. It was a deep, grating shudder, a convulsion that felt mechanical and profoundly wrong. The celebration died instantly, replaced by a stunned silence as the colonists struggled to keep their balance, their faces etched with a new and terrifying kind of confusion. The lie was no longer just data on a screen. It was the very ground moving under their feet. That first night on Elysium-7 was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Two moons, one a sharp silver sliver and the other a heavy amber orb, hung in a sky so clear it felt like looking into the depths of space itself. For most, it was a spectacle of pure wonder, a reward for their long journey. But for Beniko, the mission's astronomer, the sky was a map, a clock, and a ledger of absolute truth. While others set up shelters and shared rations by the warmth of biolanterns, she was already assembling her portable telescope array, her movements precise and automatic. Her entire life had been spent reading the stars. They were her oldest, most reliable friends. As the array whirred to life, she input their supposed coordinates, the ones hard-coded into the ship's navigation core. The system should have immediately aligned with the glittering tapestry above, confirming their position in the Orion spur. But the alignment motors stuttered and strained, unable to find a match. A cold knot of disbelief tightened in Beniko's stomach. She ran a manual calibration, then a diagnostic on the scope itself, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. Everything checked out. The problem wasn't with her equipment. She began the painstaking work of manual observation, identifying key navigational stars and measuring their precise positions and magnitudes against the known galactic background. Each new calculation deepened her unease. The constellations were subtly distorted, familiar patterns warped as if seen through a funhouse mirror. The bright beacon of Sigma Orionis was missing entirely from its predicted quadrant. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she cross-referenced her findings with the stellar cartography database. The results were irrefutable, a mathematical certainty that turned her blood to ice. These stars, this specific celestial arrangement, could only be observed from a point at least 5 light-years from their intended destination. She found Captain Vance on the perimeter of the camp, his silhouette outlined against the soft glow of the habitat modules. He was staring out into the dark, alien forest, his posture rigid. Beniko's approach was direct, her voice stripped of its usual warmth, leaving only the cold steel of data. She didn't bother with a greeting. "Captain, the stellar drift. The parallax measurements are off by margins that aren't possible. We are not in the Elysium-7 system." Vance didn't turn around. "Your equipment just went through a centuries-long deep freeze, Beniko. Sensor ghosts. Give it time to recalibrate. This isn't a calibration error." She insisted, her composure cracking. "I've triple-checked everything. I'm looking at the light from stars that, from our promised coordinates, wouldn't reach us for another 5 years. We are 5 light-years off course. How is that possible? What happened to the ship?" Finally, Vance turned to face her. In the dim light, his face looked older, etched with a weariness that went far beyond the fatigue of landing. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, resigned gravity. He held her furious, confused gaze for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and hollow, carrying the weight of a terrible secret. "Some truths," he said, the words measured and deliberate, "are better revealed gradually." The statement hung in the air between them, not as an explanation, but as a dismissal. It was an admission wrapped in a deflection. Before Beniko could process the enormity of his confession, before she could demand a real answer, he simply turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows of the camp and leaving her alone under a sky full of lies. The celebrations felt a world away, muffled by the thick hull of the landed ship. Inside the dimly lit command center, Kaelen was alone with the ghost. The main console glowed softly, casting long shadows across his face as his fingers danced across the interface. The encryption on the Project Chimera file was military-grade, a brutal wall of code meant to keep out anyone without the highest clearance. But Kaelen wasn't just a colonist. He was the systems architect who had helped design the ship's redundant data networks. He knew its digital skeleton better than he knew his own. He bypassed the official security protocols by rerouting through a maintenance subroutine, a backdoor he'd built into the system himself, a programmer's habit of leaving himself a key under the mat. The file didn't unlock with a triumphant chime. It simply unfolded, a silent, damning bloom of data on the screen. The first document was a mission amendment order, time-stamped with a date that stole the air from his lungs. It was issued 3 full years after the Odyssey had left Earth's orbit. The math was a cold, brutal punch. They had been in cryo-sleep, completely unaware, while their future was being rewritten from a planet they would never see again. The order was clinical, bureaucratic, authorizing a radical shift in the terraforming protocol for Elysium-7, citing unverified efficiency gains from a new bioaccelerant compound. Attached to the order was a single audio log labeled with the name Dr. Aris Thorne, Chief Xenobiologist. Kaelen's hand hovered over the play icon for a moment, a tremor of dread running through him. He tapped it. The voice that filled the quiet chamber was strained, whispering urgently as if afraid of being overheard. The initial compound was designed for sustainability, for gradual, stable integration with the local biome. But this new formula, it's a runaway catalyst. The projections are a nightmare. It doesn't just prepare the soil, it consumes it. It will create a superficial paradise above ground, a hyper-accelerated ecosystem that will burn itself out in a decade, maybe less. But the real horror, the scientist's voice broke, thick with a fear that felt fresh despite the centuries. The initial core samples from the landing zone, they show the compound has already interacted with the planet's unique subsurface geology. It's not just altering the soil, it's creating a crystalline latticework beneath it, a structure of immense tensile strength. They're not habitats down there. A sharp, scuffling sound cut through the recording, the frantic rustle of papers and a panicked gasp. "They're coming. You have to warn them. Tell the colonists." The voice rose to a desperate shout. "They'll be living tombs, not homes." A deafening crackle of static erupted, so harsh and violent that Kaelen flinched back from the console. It screamed for a second longer before cutting to an absolute, eternal silence. The quiet of the ship was suddenly deafening, heavier than the void of space itself. Kaelen sat frozen, the scientist's final, terrified warning echoing in the silence of his own mind. Living tombs. He looked at the image of the lush, vibrant world on the main viewport, and now he saw only a beautiful, poisonous skin stretched over a hidden, skeletal horror. The amendment order was the lie, but the original mission files, the true, unaltered plan for their colony, had to still be buried somewhere in the core memory. They had been deleted, but in a system this complex, nothing is ever truly erased. It's just misplaced. Finding that original blueprint was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was the only chance they had to understand what they were really standing on and what was growing beneath their feet. It started with a scream, not a cry of surprise or fear, but a raw, guttural sound of agony that ripped through the camp's morning quiet, silencing the hum of generators and the chatter of hopeful colonists. His name was Elias. He'd been part of the botany team, a gentleman who had spent the morning marveling at the vibrant, trumpet-shaped blossoms that grew in profusion along the tree line. He'd even picked one, tucking it behind his ear with a laugh, a splash of brilliant violet against his temple. Now he was on the ground, his body convulsing, his face and neck swelling into a distorted mask, his breaths coming in short, desperate rasps. Dr. Aris Evans was there in moments, her med kit already open. The camp's medical protocols were supposed to be foolproof. Every colonist's nano-enhanced med scanner, woven into the fabric of their sleeves, was a first line of defense, designed to sniff the air and warn of any biological threat long before it could cause harm. It should have shrieked an alarm the second Elias got near that flower. It had remained silent as Aris fought to stabilize him, jamming an epinephrine injector against his thigh. Her own scanner was screaming a different story, identifying a potent neurotoxin in the pollen now coating Elias's skin and clothes. The compound was a known, catalogued allergen, flagged in the mission's botanical database with the highest warning level. She worked with a frantic, controlled precision, but it was already too late. The reaction was too severe, too fast. His airway had closed completely. Elias's hand, clutching at hers, went limp. The light faded from his terrified eyes, and just like that, the colony of Elysium-7 had its first death. It wasn't from a hostile creature or a landing accident. It was from a flower, a death by beauty. The camp fell into a stunned, heartbroken silence. As others gently carried Elias's body away, Aris remained kneeling in the alien soil, her mind reeling. The disconnect was deafening. Her scanner had identified the threat instantly. Why hadn't his? She pulled the data log from his med scanner, her fingers trembling slightly as she synced it to her datapad. The readout should have shown a cascade of failed alerts, a record of the device detecting the toxin and trying, unsuccessfully, to warn its wearer, but the log was clean. Eerily, impossibly clean. It showed nothing but nominal readings for the entire morning, as if Elias had been sitting in a sterilized room. A cold, professional suspicion cut through her grief. She ran a deep-level diagnostic, bypassing the user interface to access the scanner's core programming. This was where the truth lived, in the lines of code that governed its very purpose. And there, buried in a subroutine marked environmental filtering, she found it. A specific list of biological signatures, their threat-level parameters manually overridden. The system wasn't broken, it had been instructed to ignore them. The violet trumpet flower's toxin was at the top of the list, its danger designation forcibly set to 0. It wasn't a glitch, it was a policy. Someone had programmed this device, and likely every other med scanner on the mission, to look at a known poison and see nothing but harmless beauty. She looked up from the screen, her eyes scanning the camp. Colonists moved about in a daze, their own med scanners quietly humming on their wrists, each one a potential sleeper agent, a silent accomplice to a death they were never meant to prevent. This wasn't an accident born of flawed data or an unknown variable. This was a calculated act. Elias hadn't just died. He had been led to the slaughter by a device he trusted with his life, a device that had been deliberately blinded. The pristine world around her no longer felt like a paradise. It felt like a meticulously designed trap, and the first spring had just been triggered. The seismic sensor was supposed to be a routine check, a diagnostic on a piece of equipment the colonists had assumed was simply malfunctioning due to the strange, grinding tremors. It was located on the very edge of the settlement, where the manicured landing zone gave way to the untamed, impossibly vibrant forest. Kaelen and Lyra worked in a tense silence, the shared weight of their discoveries, the falsified logs, the altered soil, the deadly flowers hanging between them like a shroud. Every chirp from an unseen creature, every rustle of the broad, waxy leaves felt like a warning. The sensor itself was embedded in a rocky outcropping, its access panel stubbornly fused shut by what looked like centuries of mineral calcification, not the few weeks they had been planetside. "It shouldn't be like this," Lyra muttered, applying a sonic driver to the rusted bolts. "This level of corrosion takes decades. It's as if this thing has been here for 100 years, baking in the elements." Her tool finally bit into the seized metal, and with a protesting shriek, the entire panel sheared off, clattering to the ground. But it wasn't the sensor's wiring they found behind it. Instead, their headlamps illuminated a smooth, metallic surface, seamlessly integrated into the rock itself. It was a keypad and a retinal scanner, both utterly pristine, gleaming as if they had been installed yesterday. Kaelen's breath caught in his throat. This was no accident of geology. This was intentional concealment. His fingers, moving on an instinct born of 1,000 system breaches, traced the edges of the keypad. "It's got power, a standalone cell buried deep." He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, bypassing the security with a few quick, precise movements that spoke of a skill set far beyond a simple colonist. There was no dramatic alarm, only a soft hydraulic hiss as a section of the rock face that had seemed utterly solid slid silently open, revealing a yawning, dark passage. Cool, sterile air washed over them, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ozone and machinery. They stepped inside, their boots ringing on a polished composite floor. The door slid shut behind them, plunging them into a silence so absolute it was deafening. Before them stood a cylindrical elevator car, its doors already open, waiting. The control panel inside glowed with a soft, inviting light, displaying a single, impossible designator for its destination, Sub-Level 1. Every official blueprint, every schematic they had access to, stated unequivocally that the colony was a surface-only operation. There were no sub-levels. The descent was long, far longer than any elevator ride had a right to be. The air grew colder, the hum of powerful, hidden machinery, a constant vibration through the walls. When the doors finally slid open, they revealed a sight that dismantled the last vestiges of the reality they thought they knew. They weren't looking at a rough-hewn cavern or a simple storage cellar. They were standing at the threshold of a fully operational, sprawling facility. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadow, supported by graceful arched buttresses. Endless rows of towering server racks blinked with countless lights, their collective hum forming a dull roar. Conduits and pipes snaked along the walls, pulsing with energy and fluids. In the distance, automated drones glided silently along tracks, performing maintenance on equipment whose purpose was utterly alien. Lyra's professional composure, her lifelong reliance on data and empirical evidence, shattered. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with a primal shock that had nothing to do with science, scanned the impossible vastness of the place. The scale, the complexity, the sheer age of it, the dust that layered some consoles, the subtle wear on the floor tiles near high-traffic areas, it all pointed to one terrifying, inescapable conclusion. Her voice, when it finally came, was a hollow whisper stripped of all certainty, carrying the weight of their entire shattered mission. Kaelen, this wasn't built after we landed. The words hung in the sterile air, a verdict. This was here before we arrived. They were not the first colonists on Elysium-7. They were merely the latest occupants of a cage they hadn't even known they were in. The sterile, chilled air of the facility seemed to thicken around them, the hum of the servers taking on a new, sinister quality. They moved deeper into the cavernous space, past banks of incomprehensible machinery that seemed to monitor and maintain something just out of sight. The path led them to a vast, circular chamber, and the sight that greeted them brought both of them to a complete and horrified standstill. The walls of the chamber were lined with row upon row of towering, translucent tanks, each one filled with a faintly glowing, viscous amber fluid. And suspended within that fluid were human forms. It was a gallery of nightmares rendered in silent, sleeping flesh. Some tanks contained fully formed adults, their faces placid and unrecognizable in the dim light. Others held adolescents, their features softer, less defined. And in the tanks farthest back, there were only vague, embryonic clusters, little more than suggestions of a human shape. Lyra's hand found Kaelen's arm, her grip tight with a terror that was beyond words. Her eyes were fixed on one of the nearest tanks, on the face of the man floating there. It was Elias, the botanist who had died just that morning from the flower's pollen, his features perfectly recreated, down to the faint scar on his chin he'd gotten as a boy. But he wasn't alone. They began to recognize others, a woman from hydroponics, one of the engineers, their own faces reflected back at them from the eerie, silent tubes. Driven by a morbid, desperate curiosity, Kaelen approached a terminal mounted near the entrance to this grotesque gallery. The screen flickered to life at his touch, displaying a cold, administrative interface. He navigated through menus with a trembling hand, his breath catching as he found what he was looking for. It wasn't a mission log or a scientific report. It was a manifest, a simple, brutal list categorized under a heading that made his blood freeze: replacement inventory. Each entry was tagged with a colonist's name, ID number, and a status bar indicating viability and deployment readiness. Next to Elias's name, the status read: processing awaiting neural imprint sync. They weren't just cloning bodies, they were planning to download memories to create perfect copies ready to step back into their lives without anyone ever knowing the original was gone. The pieces of the horrific puzzle slammed together in his mind with the force of a physical blow. The mission amendment, the falsified data, the deliberately blinded med scanners. They weren't here to build a colony. They were lab rats in an experiment of unimaginable scale. The surface was the control group, living their lives, suffering their accidental deaths, while this facility waited beneath their feet, ready to seamlessly replace any losses to maintain the illusion, to keep the experiment running. His voice was a dry, broken rasp, the words tasting of ash as he turned to Lyra. "We're not the first crew." The truth was a void opening beneath his feet. "We're the backups," as if the facility itself had been waiting for that exact moment of revelation. A piercing, rhythmic blare erupted from speakers hidden in the high ceiling. Crimson emergency lights began to strobe, casting the chamber of horrors in a frantic, bloody glow. A synthesized voice, utterly devoid of emotion, echoed through the vast space. "Containment breach detected in Sector 7. Initiate sterilization protocol." The great doors at the chamber's entrance began to slide shut with a deafening, final groan of metal on metal. The crimson lights painted Captain Vance's face in stark, alternating shades of blood and shadow, his expression a granite mask of resignation. He wasn't running. He wasn't even trying to stop them. He simply stood between Kaelen, Lyra, and the advancing security detail, one hand raised not in a threat but in a plea for a single moment of grace. "Stand down," he barked at his own team, his voice cutting through the alarm scream with an authority that made them hesitate. He turned back to the two colonists, their faces pale with horror and betrayal. "You weren't supposed to find this, not yet, perhaps not ever." Kaelen shoved his datapad toward the captain, the screen displaying the damning replacement inventory. "Were any of us supposed to know that we're just spare parts for a graveyard, that this whole mission is a charade?" His voice trembled with a fury born of utter violation. Vance didn't even glance at the screen. He didn't need to. The truth was a weight he had been carrying alone for the entire journey. The original colony ship, the Elysium Dream, arrived in this system 53 years ago. He said, the words flat, drained of all emotion, as if he were reciting a casualty report. They landed, they built. For 5 years, according to the fragmented data we recovered, they thrived. They sent back triumphant messages about the paradise they were building. They were the hope of all mankind. He took a slow, weary breath, his eyes finally leaving theirs to gaze at the horrific gallery of clones, and then silence. Total, absolute silence. The corporate and government sponsors back on Earth had staked everything on this single endeavor. The entire world economy was leveraged on the promise of Elysium. To announce its failure, it would have meant collapse, global panic, the end of everything. Lyra found her voice, though it was little more than a horrified whisper. "So they sent us as a cover-up, a contingency," Vance corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. A second ship with a nearly identical crew manifest launched in secret. "Our mission was never to colonize a new world. It was to resurrect a dead one, to land, to take up the posts of our predecessors, and to continue broadcasting the lie of their success. To be the smiling faces on the video feed sent back to a desperate Earth." He finally looked at them, and the depth of the sorrow in his eyes was more terrifying than any anger. "The facility, the clones, they are a failsafe, a way to maintain the population count, to explain away any accidents in a dangerous frontier environment. To keep the story perfect and unchanging for the viewers at home, we are curators of a museum built on a mass grave. The sheer, monstrous scale of the deception left them speechless. They weren't pioneers, they were actors on a stage, reading lines for an audience they would never see, living lives that were nothing more than a propaganda piece. Kaelen felt the world tilt underneath him, and you knew the whole time. I was briefed a year into the voyage during my mandatory wake cycle, Vance said, his voice hollow. I have lived with this for centuries. My duty is not to you. It is to the billions of people on Earth who need that lie to survive. Your discovery doesn't change that duty. It only makes it harder. He took a step closer, his voice dropping not with menace but with a profound and awful sincerity. You must understand, the lie is not for them. It is for everyone we left behind. The lie is necessary. It was the coldest, most calculated form of compassion imaginable, and in the heartbeat of silence that followed his confession, the security team, no longer held at bay, moved. They didn't tackle them, they didn't shout, they simply moved with a chilling efficiency, their grips firm and impersonal on Kaelen and Lyra's arms. There was no struggle, no dramatic fight. There was only the crushing weight of the truth, and the silent, inevitable compliance that followed it as they were led away from the captain, away from the terrible truth, and into the bright, sterile custody of the very illusion they had been sent to uphold. The cell was a perfect cube of featureless white composite, the air humming with the sterile chill of recycled atmosphere and absolute containment. There were no bars, only seamless walls that seemed to absorb sound and hope in equal measure. Kaelen paced the small perimeter, his mind racing through every system schematic he'd ever memorized, searching for a flaw, a vulnerability in their perfect prison. Lyra sat motionless on the bare bench, her gaze fixed on nothing, her face a pale mask of shock. The enormity of Captain Vance's confession had hollowed her out. They were relics in a museum of lies, their lives a performance for an audience of billions on a world they would never see again. A section of the wall they had assumed was solid shimmered and dissolved without a sound, revealing not a guard, but a figure so unexpected they both froze. The man was ancient, his posture stooped, his face a roadmap of deep lines and weary sorrow. He wore the tattered, faded remains of a science division jumpsuit, but its style and insignia were from a design decades older than their own. His eyes, however, held a sharp, unnerving clarity, burning with an intelligence that had been honed by years of solitude and observation. In his trembling hand, he held a small, jury-rigged device that blipped with a soft, steady light. "You are not the first to see this place and ask why," the old man said, his voice a dry rustle like pages turning in a forgotten book. "They always put the curious ones in this cell. It has the best acoustic dampening. They think it prevents contagion." He offered a thin, humorless smile. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, or I was. The man they named your chief medical officer after, perhaps as a monument to their hypocrisy." Kaelen's breath caught. Dr. Aris Thorne, the name from the audio log, the terrified voice screaming a warning across centuries. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. "The original me is, I assume," Thorne replied, his smile fading. "Murdered for his conscience after he tried to warn our ship. I am a subsequent iteration. A copy of a copy, awakened periodically to maintain the systems that sustain this charade. They think the repeated resets have left me docile, addled. They are mistaken." He took a limping step into the cell, his eyes darting to the open doorway behind him. "We don't have long. The patrol drones are on a diverted loop, but it is brief." Lyra found her voice, a thread of desperation in it. Why all of this? The clones, the lies. Thorne's gaze intensified, focusing on her with a painful empathy. "You have seen the data. You know the terraforming was a lie, but you have asked the wrong question. You assume the planet was made for us." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that seemed to suck all the air from the room. "The compound they used, the bioaccelerant, It wasn't designed to terraform a world for us. It was designed to digest a world, to break it down into its core energetic components. And we are not the colonists, we are the catalyst. This facility, your colony on the surface, it is not a settlement, it is a digestive tract. The planet isn't being terraformed. His words were cut off as the entire facility plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The hum of the servers, the faint whisper of climate control, the distant whir of drones, every sound ceased at once, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure on the eardrums. The emergency lights did not flicker on. For 5 terrifying heartbeats, there was nothing but void and the panicked sound of their own breathing. Then, as abruptly as it vanished, power roared back to life. The white walls glowed again, the systems hummed, and the cell door began to rapidly reform, its molecules gathering back into an unbroken surface. In that fleeting window of darkness and restored light, Doctor. Thorn pressed the small, blinking device into Kaelen's hand. The surge happens every 47 hours, he hissed, his voice urgent now. The systems are most vulnerable then. This will show you the way. Before either of them could respond, the old man shuffled backward, the wall sealing itself shut between them, leaving them once again in their silent, white prison. The weight of a new and even more horrifying truth settling upon them, and a mysterious key burning a hole in Kaelen's palm. The darkness was a living thing, thick and absolute, pressing in on them from all sides. The sudden, total silence after the constant hum of the facility was more deafening than any alarm. In that void, Kaelen's fingers closed around the device the old man had given him, its soft, steady blip now the only point of reference in a universe of nothing. Then a hand clamped onto his arm, its grip surprisingly strong. Now, Dr. Thorne's voice rasped right next to his ear, devoid of any hesitation. Move. Left wall, 20 paces, do not stop. They stumbled forward blindly, Lyra's hand finding Kaelen's shoulder, the 3 of them a desperate, shuffling chain in the oppressive black. Kaelen counted his steps, his heart hammering against his ribs, each beat a lifetime. At 18, his free hand brushed against the cool, seamless composite of the wall. At 20, Thorne's guiding hand shoved him forward, and a section of the wall gave way with a nearly silent sigh. Not a door sliding open, but the material itself seeming to part and then flow shut behind them. They were in a narrow, pitch-black conduit, the air stale and thick with dust. The only light was the faint, rhythmic pulse from the device in Kaelen's hand. This way, Thorne whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. The maintenance shafts are the original structure from the first colony. They built around them, but they couldn't erase them. My predecessors and I, we have been custodians of these forgotten paths for a long, long time. They moved in single file, the old man setting a pace that belied his frail appearance, driven by a purpose that had been decades in the making. The conduit sloped upward, a tight, spiraling climb that made their muscles burn and their lungs ache. The sounds of the facility returning to life began to filter through the walls, the rising hum of power, the distant, distorted squawk of an alarm, and beneath it all, the heavy, rhythmic thud of bootsteps. The pursuit had begun. After what felt like an eternity of climbing, Thorne stopped before a heavy, circular hatch, its manual wheel rusted in place. With a grunt of effort, he and Kaelen put their shoulders into it, the metal shrieking in protest before finally surrendering and turning. The hatch swung inward, and they spilled out into a small, dome-shaped chamber perched high above the alien landscape. The entire far wall was a single curved pane of transparent alloy, offering a breathtaking, terrifying view of the emerald green world below. And in the center of the room, surrounded by a nest of frayed wiring, patched conduits, and jury-rigged power cells, stood a communications array. It was an antique, a relic from the first mission, its dish pointed defiantly at the star-strewn sky. They decommissioned all long-range arrays on the surface, Thorne explained, his chest heaving as he moved to a console, his fingers dancing across ancient keys with a practiced grace. Everything is filtered through the facility's core, monitored and edited before a single byte is ever transmitted back to Earth. But this was my life's work. Scavenged parts, stolen power, rerouted through a blind spot in their orbital sensor net. It has taken me 50 years to make it ready for you. The hatchway behind them reverberated with a sudden, violent pounding. Metal shrieked as something powerful began to force it open. They were out of time. Thorne grabbed a data crystal from the console and thrust it into Kaelen's hand. It was warm to the touch. This contains everything. The original mission logs of the Elysium dream, their final, panicked transmissions. The geological surveys proving the planet's core is being consumed. The manifests for every clone ever grown in this nightmare factory, the truth. He looked from Kaelen to Lyra, his ancient eyes blazing with a final, desperate intensity. The pounding on the hatch grew louder, a dent beginning to form in the center of the metal. "You must send it," he urged them, his voice cracking with emotion. "Broadcast it on every frequency, on a continuous loop. Do not let them stop you. Tell Earth the truth. Tell them what this place really is, not a colony. A farm, not a new beginning, but the same cruel ending played on a loop." The central locking bolt on the hatch shattered with a sound like a gunshot. Thorne shoved them toward a narrow service ladder leading up to the array's main dish. Go, before the cycle repeats with the next ship and the next and the next. As Kaelen and Lyra scrambled up the ladder into the cold night air, the hatch below finally burst open. They didn't look back. They heard the shouted commands, the scuffle of bodies, and then a single, sharp, concussive sound that was horribly final. The pursuit would be on the ladder in seconds. There was no time for grief, only for the crushing weight of the promise that had just been made. High above the beautiful, lying world, with the fate of billions resting on their actions, they began the transmission, sending the screams of the dead and the confession of a monster out into the silent, listening void. The cold metal of the access ladder bit into their palms as they hauled themselves onto the narrow gantry surrounding the communications dish. The night wind whipped around them, carrying the distant, alien sounds of the forest below and the approaching shouts of their pursuers climbing up after them. Kaelen's fingers, numb with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the data crystal, finally slotting it into the ancient console. The array hummed to life, a deep, resonant vibration that thrummed through the deck plates, a sound of raw, unmonitored power that felt utterly alien after the controlled hum of the facility. Lights flickered across the board, a cascade of green and amber that spoke of a system waking from a long, forced sleep. Lyra stood guard at the top of the ladder, her body braced against the opening, but they both knew it was a futile gesture. The array's dish began to move with a pained, grinding shriek of long unused servos, tilting upward, aligning itself with a specific patch of star-strewn blackness. Home, the sight of it should have been a comfort, a beacon of everything they had fought to protect. Now it felt like the eye of a predator, cold and distant and watching. Kaelen's hand hovered over the final initiation switch, the engraved word transmit worn almost smooth by time. He met Lyra's eyes for a single, breathless moment, a silent exchange of everything they had lost and everything they were about to risk. This wasn't just data, it was a ghost story, a eulogy and an accusation, compressed into a screaming bolt of energy aimed at the heart of the very civilization that had sent them here. He slammed the switch down. The effect was instantaneous and deafening. The array didn't just send the message, it screamed it. A blinding arc of raw energy leapt from the dish into the sky, painting their faces in stark white light for a terrifying second. The console screamed in protest, overload alarms shrieking as decades of pent-up power surged through its antiquated circuits. The transmission bar on the screen didn't just fill, it exploded into the red, the progress bar rocketing toward completion. They had seconds, maybe less. the first guard's head appeared at the top of the ladder, his weapon raised. Lyra kicked out, her boot connecting with his helmet with a sickening crack, sending him tumbling back down into the darkness. But there were more behind him. The console in front of Kaelen sparked violently, a capacitor bursting in a shower of acrid smoke and molten plastic. The transmission bar froze at 98%. A primal scream of frustration tore from his throat. He couldn't fail now, not after everything. He slammed his fist onto the console, a desperate, useless act. And then a miracle. A single, clear, high-pitched tone sang out from the speaker. The screen, flickering erratically, displayed one word in stark, simple text: complete. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over them, so powerful it was almost dizzying. They had done it. Against all odds, they had told someone. They had broken the silence. They had a new line of text scrolled across the screen beneath the status report. It was an automated response, incoming from the deep space communication network on Earth. It was not the frantic, shocked reply they had envisioned. It was not a demand for confirmation or a promise of help. It was cold, clinical, and utterly horrifying in its simplicity. Message authenticated, containment protocol initiated. The words hung in the air, their meaning a slower, deeper explosion that obliterated the fleeting moment of victory. Containment protocol. They weren't receiving a rescue plan. They were receiving an execution order. The people on Earth, the very ones they had just begged for salvation, had not only received their message of existential horror, but had immediately categorized it as a threat to be managed, a secret to be kept. The lie wasn't just here on Elysium-7, it was there on the world they called home. It was the foundation of everything Earth already knew, they had always known. The realization was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the soul that left them gasping. In that frozen second of devastating clarity, the guards swarmed over the gantry. They didn't aim their weapons at Kaelen and Lyra. They turned them on the array. The focused energy beams tore into the ancient machinery, melting conduits, shattering the dish, reducing 50 years of secret, desperate work to a smoldering, unrecognizable ruin in a matter of heartbeats. But the destruction was almost an afterthought. The real ruin was already inside them, a cold, dead weight in the pit of their stomachs. They had not escaped the maze. They had simply discovered that the walls stretched infinitely in every direction, and that the keepers of the maze were the very ones they had called their masters. The walk back to the main colony felt less like a return and more like a descent into a different kind of prison. The air, once fragrant with alien blossoms, now carried a new, unsettling scent, a metallic tang like ozone and copper that seemed to cling to the back of the throat. The vibrant, waxy leaves of the flora seemed to watch them as they passed, their stillness feeling less like peace and more like a held breath. They had expected to find a camp in mourning or perhaps one gearing up for a fight. Instead, they found a community sliding quietly into a waking nightmare. The first sign was the silence, the usual sounds of construction, the chatter of working groups, the hum of generators. It was all there, but underneath it was a new, unnatural quiet. People moved through their tasks with a placid, glassy-eyed detachment. A man was methodically stacking the same crate over and over again, his movements precise, repetitive, and utterly devoid of purpose. A woman stood perfectly still, staring at a flowering vine, her head tilted at an odd angle as if listening to a melody only she could hear. Then they saw Mara. She had been one of the most vibrant among them, a geologist with a laugh that could cut through the thickest tension. Now she was kneeling in the rich, dark soil, not taking samples, but simply running her hands through it over and over, a beatific, vacant smile on her face. Her fingers were stained a deep, unnatural green, the color having seeped into her skin and under her nails. When Lyra approached, calling her name softly, Mara looked up. Her eyes were the most terrifying part. The warm brown irises were now shot through with faint, luminescent green filaments like tiny circuits coming to life. She didn't recognize Lyra at all. She simply smiled wider and whispered, "Can't you hear it, the song? It's so much clearer now." They found Dr. Aris Evans in the med bay, which had become a triage center for a plague no one could define. She was hunched over a bank of displays, her face ashen, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through a cascade of genetic data. The room behind her was a study in quiet horror. Colonists lay on cots, not thrashing or screaming, but simply changing. Some had patches of skin that had taken on a bark-like texture. Others had fine, lichen-like growths tracing the veins on their arms. All of them had the same distant, listening look in their eyes. "They call it the clarity," Aris said without looking up, her voice hollow with exhaustion and dread. It started a few hours after the incident at the facility. Headaches at first, then auditory hallucinations, a constant whispering hum they describe as a beautiful song. Then the physical changes began. She finally turned to look at them, and the raw, professional horror in her eyes was more terrifying than any panic. She gestured to the screens. "I thought it was a pathogen, a prion, anything I could fight. I was wrong. I've been running full-spectrum bioscans, deep tissue molecular assays. It's not an infection." She zoomed in on a double helix rotating on the main screen. This is the genetic sequence of subject Mara O'Connell, taken upon waking from cryo-sleep. The image was clean, a perfect human genome. With a tap, a second helix appeared alongside it, flickering and alive with foreign alien code. "This is from 10 minutes ago." The difference was staggering. Entire segments of non-coding DNA, the so-called junk DNA that makes up most of the human genome, were now lit up, active, and rewriting themselves. Alien sequences were splicing into the fundamental blueprint of what made them human, activating dormant genes and introducing entirely new ones. The pollen, the soil, the very air we're breathing. Aris continued, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "It's not poison, it's a transmission, a biological broadcast. The bioaccelerant they used didn't just terraform the planet's surface. It turned the entire ecosystem into a gene-editing engine. We're not being infected, we're being assimilated. The environment is rewriting our DNA, cell by cell, turning us into something that can hear its song, something that can truly belong here." She looked from the screens to the peacefully transforming colonists, her scientific certainty crumbling into despair. The first colonists didn't die out. They just joined the chorus, and now so are we. The lush, oxygen-rich air of the agricultural dome was thick with the scent of damp soil and growing things, a false promise of life that now felt like a smothering blanket. They had chosen it for its labyrinthine rows of hydroponic trays and genetically engineered fruiting vines, a place to hide and try to process the unimaginable truth. The hum of the facility's assimilation signal was a constant, low-grade pressure behind their eyes, a whisper they now had to consciously fight to ignore. They didn't hear his approach until his shadow fell over them, his frame blocking the artificial sunlight. Captain Vance stood there, his uniform impeccably clean, his expression unreadable. Kaelen and Lyra scrambled back, bracing for the confrontation, for the arrest, for the final, crushing end. But the command never came. Vance didn't raise his weapon or call for security. Instead, his shoulders slumped, the rigid posture of command dissolving into a posture of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked older than his years, the weight of centuries of travel and a lifetime of lies etched into the lines around his eyes. "You can stop hiding," he said, his voice low and stripped of all its former authority. It was just a voice now, tired and raw. "They're not looking for you here." Not yet. The changes are occupying everyone's attention. The system is prioritizing the assimilation over containment, for now. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her body still taut with suspicion. Why aren't you dragging us back to the white cells? We broke your perfect illusion. We sent the message." A bitter, humorless smile touched Vance's lips. You sent a message. You didn't break anything. The people who built this machine, they accounted for truth-tellers. The protocol you received, containment initiated, that wasn't for us. That was for Earth, to lock down any further communications, to discredit the source, to reinforce the lie for the billions who depend on it. Your act of rebellion was just another variable their equations predicted and neutralized. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, his hands open and empty at his sides. I'm not here as your jailer. I'm here because you are the only other people on this planet who know this is a prison, and I have been dying of loneliness inside it. He began to unbutton the cuff of his uniform jacket, his movement slow, almost ceremonial. You think I embraced this, that I enjoyed being the warden of a graveyard, shepherding lambs to a slaughter they believed was a paradise. He pushed the sleeve up his forearm. The skin, there was not the unblemished flesh of a man in peak health. It was mottled, traced with the same faint, luminous green filaments they had seen in Mara's eyes. In places, the skin had hardened into a strange, bark-like texture, a subtle but undeniable transformation. I believed the lie, too. I swallowed it whole. I was the perfect company man, ready to uphold the mission at any cost, until my predecessor showed me the truth. Kaelen stared, the anger in him cooling into a stunned, icy dread. Your predecessor, the captain of the Elysium dream, Vance gave a slow, grim nod. What's left of him? He's deep in the lower levels of the facility, part of the maintenance system now. Barely recognizable, kept alive by the same processes that are changing us. He found me during my first command cycle wake-up, showed me what this place really was, what I was really meant to do. My duty wasn't to ensure the colony's success. It was to manage its decline, to keep the population stable and docile while the planet consumed them, and to be ready to greet the next ship and the next with the same smiling lie. He pulled his sleeve down, covering the horrifying evidence. I can't stop it. The process is too vast, too integrated, but for years I've been trying to slow it down. Diverting resources, creating faulty reports, mislabeling chemical batches, small acts of sabotage that amount to nothing more than kicking the rocks before the landslide. I thought if I could buy enough time, a real solution would present itself, or that I would find someone who could see the cracks in the world without having to be bludgeoned with the truth. He looked at them, and for the first time there was something like a faint, desperate hope in his eyes. You found the cracks all on your own. His gaze drifted from their shocked faces to the impossible forest beyond the dome's transparent panels, a world of terrifying, beautiful perfection. You think our mission was one of expansion, a bold new chapter for humanity. He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. It was an act of desperation. A final, monstrous gamble by a species staring into its own extinction. He leaned forward, the green filaments in his eyes seeming to pulse with a faint internal light. Earth is dying, not in some distant theoretical future, but now. The biosphere is unraveling at a rate that makes reversal impossible. The atmosphere, the oceans, they are turning against the very DNA that built them. Conventional science, politics, economics, they were all just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. He gestured vaguely toward the sky, toward the home they would never see again. The sponsors of this mission, the combined corporate and government powers, they didn't just want a new home. They wanted a new kind of human, one that could survive the hellscape they knew was coming. A species reboot, his voice dropped to a haunted whisper. Elysium-7 wasn't chosen for its habitability. It was chosen for its unique, aggressive biology. A biosphere that doesn't just tolerate foreign life. It absorbs it, rewrites it, and integrates it. The initial terraforming compound was never meant to make this world more like Earth. It was a key designed to unlock the planet's most radical evolutionary mechanisms and turn them on us. The truth was a cold shard of ice sliding into their hearts. They weren't pioneers, they were lab rats in the largest, most cruel experiment in human history. The rapid evolution you're witnessing, the physical changes, they are the entire point of the colony. Vance continued, his tone clinical now, as if he'd rehearsed this horrific revelation in his mind 1,000 times. The planet's biology is a forge, and we are the raw metal being hammered into a new shape. The clarity, the song they hear, it's not a disease. It's the signal of a successful merger. Their individual consciousness, their fears, their memories, their very sense of self, it's all being gently, irrevocably dissolved into the planet's overarching neural network. They are becoming nodes in a vast planetary mind. They are achieving a harmony we could never know on our dying, fractured world. But the cost is the singular, beautiful noise of a single human soul. He looked at his own arm where the green filament snaked beneath his skin. This isn't a contamination, it's an upgrade, a survival adaptation of the most brutal and efficient kind. The sponsors knew they couldn't save everyone on Earth, so they created this factory to produce a viable successor species, one that could perhaps one day be introduced to Earth's corpse to begin anew. We were never meant to build a society here. We were meant to become the foundation of one. Our bodies, our transformed biology, would be the seed stock for a humanity that could live in a world we had broken. The weight of his complicity settled over him like a physical burden. My duty was never to protect you, it was to shepherd you through the transformation. To deliver a viable product to the shareholders waiting back home. We aren't colonists, we are the last precious battery of genetic material, and this planet is the charger, reprogramming us for a future we never chose. The captain's confession hung in the humid air of the Agri Dome, a toxic cloud of truth that poisoned every memory of their mission. Their purpose, their very identities, had been erased and rewritten by unseen architects of a horrific new evolution. In the crushing silence that followed, it was Beniko, the astronomer, who spoke first. Her voice was thin, strained, but her mind was already cutting through the horror towards a cold, hard calculation. Genetic markers, she whispered, her eyes wide not with fear but with a dawning, terrible understanding. They didn't just select the best and brightest. They selected for genetic pliability, for a genome that would be most receptive to the rewriting. She turned to Vance, her professional detachment a fragile shield against the enormity of the idea. The mission manifest. I need to see the raw, unfiltered bioscreening data for every colonist, not the sanitized versions we were given access to, the deep layer profiles. Vance, his own secret now laid bare, simply nodded. It was a small, quiet act of treason that felt more significant than any transmission they had attempted. He provided her with a secure access code to a partitioned server, a sliver of data he had kept hidden even from the facility's core systems, while the others sat in stunned silence, grappling with the concept that they were walking raw materials. Beniko buried herself in the data. For hours, she was motionless, her face illuminated by the frantic scroll of genetic sequences on her datapad, her fingers tracing patterns of nucleotides as if reading a dire prophecy. She cross-referenced the list of those already showing advanced physical changes with their pre-mission genetic screenings. The correlation was not just strong, it was absolute. A specific cluster of non-coding DNA, previously thought to be meaningless junk, was present in 98% of those succumbing to the clarity. Then she ran the same analysis on their own small group. On Kaelen, on Lyra, on Dr. Evans, on herself. The result was a different kind of shock. They all shared a different, far rarer genetic signature, a set of recessive alleles that acted like a firewall, making their DNA strangely resistant to the planet's aggressive gene editing broadcast. They weren't immune, but the process was happening at a glacial pace compared to the others. They were the outliers, the statistical errors, the ones who didn't fit the plan. They knew, Beniko said, her voice hollow as she looked up from the screen. The selection committee had to have known. They would have seen this resistance marker in our profiles. They approved us anyway. Why? The answer came to her not from the genetic data, but from a memory of her own psych evaluations of the endless personality assessments. Because we're not the product, we're the quality control. The realization was like a punch to the gut. They needed a control group, a handful of us who would change slowly, who would retain our critical faculties long enough to observe the process, to document the success of the experiment, and to manage the population until the transition was complete. We weren't saved by accident. We were designed to be the last shepherds. This grim new understanding forged their next move with a chilling clarity. If they were the control group, then their purpose had just been violently rewritten. They began to move through the quietly transforming colony not as fellow victims, but as observers seeing it with new eyes. They looked for others. They watched for the rare individual who still jumped at a sudden noise, who still had a flash of frustration or confusion in their eyes instead of placid acceptance, who hadn't yet started humming the haunting, discordant melody that seemed to be the anthem of the assimilated. They found them in ones and twos, hidden in the cracks of the evolving society. An engineer named Ree, who had sealed herself in a maintenance closet, terrified of the greenish hue she saw spreading up her arms but fighting it with every ounce of her will. A botanist named Finn, who had been purposefully poisoning the vibrant, deadly flowers around his shelter in a desperate, futile act of defiance. They were scared, isolated, and beginning to believe they were losing their minds. Gathering them was a delicate and dangerous operation. They couldn't risk a public meeting. Instead, they used the forgotten ducts and serviceways doctor. Thorn had shown them, guiding the resistant few through the underbelly of the colony to a hidden clearing deep in the forest, a place where the artificial light of the habitat modules didn't reach, and the whisper of the leaves almost drowned out the planet's constant, insidious hum. There were 17 of them in total, 17 souls huddled together in the dark, their faces pale and etched with fear, but their eyes blazing with a desperate, unyielding clarity of their own, the clarity of those who still knew they were being stolen from themselves. They were a fractured mirror of the original crew, a random assortment of skills and personalities united only by a quirk of biology their overseers had deemed useful. In that moment, standing before them, Kaelen understood their real mission for the first time. They were not meant to save the colony, that was already lost. Their duty was to become its witness, its record, and if possible, its final, devastating critique. They were the immune system of a doomed body, and their fight was not for survival, but for the truth of what survival had cost. The old colonists' directions were less a map and more a litany of whispered warnings, a path defined by the things to avoid. He spoke of the breath of the planet, areas where the metallic scent in the air grew so thick it clouded the mind, and of singing stones that emitted a low-frequency hum designed to lure the lost. Their small band of resistance moved like ghosts through the undergrowth, the vibrant, hostile beauty of the forest now feeling like a surveilled and conscious enemy. The deeper they went, the more the environment itself seemed to reject their presence. Vines subtly shifted to block their path, and the unnervingly perfect symmetry of the flora began to break down, giving way to twisted, pulsating forms that looked less like plants and more like exposed internal organs made of crystal and chlorophyll. The air grew thick and heavy, humming with a palpable energy that vibrated in their teeth and bones. The ground beneath their feet transitioned from soft soil to a hard, glassy surface veined with soft, pulsing light, as if they were walking on the skin of a giant circuit board. The source of the light and the hum lay ahead, a vast, yawning opening in the side of a colossal rock face, its edges smoothed and shaped not by erosion, but by some form of precise biological engineering. It wasn't a cave, it was an aperture. Inside, the world they knew vanished completely. They found themselves within a cavern of unimaginable scale, its curved walls and soaring ceiling composed entirely of a shimmering, crystalline latticework. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, a phosphorescent heartbeat that traveled along the strands in complex, beautiful patterns. The light was not merely illumination, it was information. They could feel it, a pressure against their minds, a silent, screaming chorus of data, and woven into this immense, organic supercomputer were people. Dozens of them, colonists they recognized from the settlement, were embedded chest deep in the crystalline matrix, their bodies seamlessly fused with the structure. Their eyes were open, glowing with the same soft green light as the walls, their faces serene, their mouths slightly agape as they breathed in unison with the cavern's pulsating rhythm. They were not in distress, they were a part of the whole, their individual forms serving as processing nodes in a system of staggering complexity. The old colonist, his own eyes reflecting the terrifying grandeur, finally spoke the truth they were all witnessing. "This is not a machine they built," he whispered, his voice filled with a dreadful awe. "This is the machine, the entire planet, the forests, the soil, the very air. It's all part of a single planet-wide consciousness." A neural network. The first colony didn't build a settlement here. They provided the final, key ingredient it was waiting for, a higher order of cognition. A spark. He gestured a trembling hand toward the merged forms of their former crewmates. "The transformation we saw on the surface, the clarity, it isn't a disease. It's a preparatory phase, a softening of the individual mind, a wiping clean of the stubborn ego to make them compatible for the final upload. They are not being consumed. They are being connected. Their memories, their knowledge, their very essence is being absorbed, integrated into the planet's vast, accumulating intelligence. We came here to colonize a world, but the world was already alive, and it was looking for new thoughts to think." In that moment of horrific revelation, the cavern itself seemed to turn its attention toward them. The gentle, rhythmic pulsing of the light intensified, the patterns on the walls shifting from a calm, flowing script into something more aggressive, more targeted. The low hum sharpened into a focused tone that drilled directly into their skulls, and the air, once heavy, became actively oppressive, pushing down on them with a will of its own. They were not just observers in the neural core, they were uninvited thoughts in a vast brain, and the planet's immune response had just been triggered. The hum of the planet's core was a physical pressure in their ears, a vibration that felt like the grinding of tectonic plates and the screaming of a million integrated minds. Standing there in the heart of the machine, the final, terrible shape of their reality snapped into focus. They were not pioneers, not colonists, not even failed experiments. They were a nutrient slurry for a planetary intelligence, an offering to a god they never knew existed. But one question screamed louder than the psychic roar around them. Why would Earth send them? Kaelen's eyes swept over the monolithic core structure, the crystalline lattice that pulsed with stolen life, and his gaze locked onto a terminal. It was unlike the others, older, its design echoing the utilitarian aesthetics of the first colony ship, the Elysium Dream. It was a data archive, a physical memory bank, and it was calling to him through the chaos. Fighting against the suffocating psychic pressure, he reached the console. The interface was a relic, but the access protocols were ones he'd spent a lifetime mastering. He bypassed the primary security with a few desperate keystrokes, his fingers moving on an instinct born of utter necessity. This wasn't a system designed to hide things from them. It was a system designed to record everything for a recipient that was never meant to be them. He found it in a directory labeled Project Longbow Final Briefing. It wasn't a mission log, it was a victory lap. The first file was a video transmission, time-stamped from Earth Central Command, dated 55 years after their own ship had left Sol. The woman on the screen was impeccably dressed, her expression one of cool, academic satisfaction. She stood before a holographic rendering of Elysium-7, its emerald beauty spinning slowly behind her. "The integration of the second cohort is proceeding ahead of schedule," she reported, her voice devoid of any emotion beyond professional pride. "The planet's neuro-assimilation field has successfully activated the targeted junk DNA sequences in 97.4% of the population." The transition to the planetary gestalt is irreversible and, according to our remote telemetry, virtually painless, a peaceful dissolution of the individual for the strength of the whole. Lyra, looking over his shoulder, let out a choked sound of pure horror. They're watching this happen in real time. Kaelen opened another file, an audio log from a scientific oversight meeting. The voices were calm, dispassionate, discussing the project's progress as if reviewing crop yields. And the beauty of the Lamarckian integration is its permanence, one scientist noted. The acquired adaptive traits, the environmental resilience, the shared consciousness, the biological immortality within the network, these are not merely learned behaviors. They are written directly into the germline. The next generation born from the Gestalt will be native to this new existence. They will be the first true Homo planetaries. Then came the phrase that would be burned into their minds forever. A different voice, older, laced with the unmistakable gravity of final authority, responded. The sacrifice of a few thousand souls is a statistically negligible price for the evolutionary leap they are enabling. We are not executing them. We are liberating them from the prison of their own fragile, individual forms. Their absorption grants the entire species a foothold in a new galaxy, a legacy that will outlive our dying sun. The few will perish so that the many may evolve. It is the ultimate act of human compassion executed on a generational scale. The sacrifice of the few for the many. The words were not a grim necessity. They were a mantra, a cold, calculated justification for mass murder framed as transcendent altruism. They scrolled through transmission logs, progress reports, and genetic forecasts, each document peeling back another layer of the monstrous lie. Earth hadn't lost contact with the first colony. They had monitored its entire extinction and assimilation, cataloging every detail, and THEN Chinese letter, the launch of the Odyssey to provide a fresh batch of subjects. They weren't sending out their best and brightest to save humanity. They were sending out its most genetically compliant members to be unmade, all to create a biological backup drive for a privileged few waiting back home. The final file they accessed was the most devastating of all. It was the original mission authorization for the Odyssey, signed and sealed by the unified Earth government. The objective was stated with chilling clarity: to establish a continuous, renewable resource stream of compatible biological material for the ongoing stabilization and expansion of the Elysium planetary consciousness. They were a delivery, a shipment of spare parts, and the transmission logs showed that the success of the colony was the primary news story being fed to the desperate populations of Earth, a glorious distraction from the crumbling world beneath their feet. A pretty lie to keep them docile until the chosen few could perhaps follow this same dark road to the stars. The people of Earth weren't being saved. They were being pacified with a fairy tale, their hope weaponized to ensure they never questioned the silent, screaming fate of those who had been sent to die for it. The silence that followed the revelation of the transmission was not a silence of shock, but of obliteration. The fight had been drained out of them, replaced by the cold, dead weight of absolute futility. Earth was not their savior, it was the co-architect of this nightmare. The beautiful, humming world around them was not their home, it was a slaughterhouse designed to look like paradise. They were not pioneers, they were livestock. Every pillar of their reality, every reason they had to get up in the morning had been systematically annihilated. Huddled in their hidden clearing, the 17 remaining souls who could still feel the sting of their own individuality faced a choice with no good answers. The debate that followed was not loud or angry, but hollow and desperate, a funeral dirge for their future. Rhi, the engineer who had barricaded herself away, spoke first, her voice cracking. "We can't stay. Every breath I take, I feel it. The song gets a little louder. I look at my hands and I have to concentrate to remember they're mine. If we stay, we become them. She gestured vaguely in the direction of the settlement toward the placid, glowing-eyed colonists tending their deadly gardens. We become part of the chorus, we stop being us, and go where Finn, the botanist, shot back, his usual defiance now just weary sarcasm, back to Earth. The people who sent us here, who are watching this happen and calling it a success, they'll just shoot our shuttle out of the sky and send another ship full of sleeping victims. We'd be delivering ourselves to the executioner. Another voice, a young medic named Lyra, whispered the third, unspoken option. Then we don't fight it. Maybe they're right, maybe it is a kind of peace, no more pain, no more fear, just being part of something vast. The words were seductive, a dangerous, sleepy logic that mirrored the planet's own whispering hum. It was the easiest choice, the path of least resistance, and in their exhaustion it glimmered like a tranquil oasis. The group fractured into quiet, despairing murmurs, each person retreating into the terrifying solitude of their own hopelessness. They were trapped in a perfect, inescapable box: fight and be erased by the planet, flee and be destroyed by Earth, submit and be dissolved into the whole. It was in this suffocating atmosphere of surrender that Kaelen finally lifted his head. He had been silent, his datapad resting on his knees, his fingers still hovering over the schematics of the planetary core he had accessed. He wasn't looking at the others, he was staring through his screen into the architecture of the machine itself. "We're asking the wrong question," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the despair with the sharpness of a scalpel. Everyone turned to look at him. "We keep thinking of this place as a prison, a cage, but a cage has a lock, a prison has walls." He tapped his screen. "This isn't a wall, it's a system, it's a program." He stood up, the datapad glowing in his hands, its light reflecting in his eyes, not with the planet's green hue, but with the cool, blue light of human ingenuity. They didn't just drop us here and let nature take its course. They engineered this, they built the bioaccelerant, they designed the assimilation signal. They programmed the core to process us. It's all code. Biological code, neural code, but code nonetheless. And code, he looked around at their drawn, frightened faces, a faint, dangerous spark of his old self returning. Code can be rewritten. The idea was so audacious, so insane, that it left them speechless. Lyra was the first to find her voice. "Rewrite a planet." "Kaelen, we're talking about a planetary consciousness, a living computer the size of a world. You can't just reprogram God. It's not God," he insisted, his passion flaring. "It's a machine that thinks it's a god. It was built, Lyra, by the first colonists, yes, but guided by the parameters Earth sent. Its entire purpose, its prime directive, is to absorb and integrate. That's its core programming, but I was in the systems. I saw the architecture. It has an operating system. It has input channels, data buffers, command protocols. I have engineer-level access to the core terminal. I couldn't stop the transmission to Earth because that was a locked external command. But this," he gestured at the world around them. "This is the internal network, and I am inside the firewall." He began pacing, the plan forming in his mind as he spoke, giving voice to a hope so fragile it threatened to shatter with every word. "We don't escape the planet, we don't surrender to it, we don't beg Earth for a mercy they will never give." He stopped and faced them all, his expression blazing with a new, terrifying purpose. "We change the planet's programming. We find the command that says assimilate and we change it. We hack the god." The path to the core was a descent into a waking nightmare, a journey through the beautiful, terrible insides of the beast. The pristine forests gave way to smooth, organic-looking architecture, the walls pulsing with the same soft green light they had seen in the eyes of the assimilated. The air hummed with the planet's song, a constant psychic pressure that promised peace in exchange for surrender. And standing between them and their goal were their friends, their colleagues, the people they had shared a lifetime of travel with. They were no longer themselves. Their movements were synchronized, unnervingly fluid, their eyes glowing with that vacant, knowing light. They did not attack with anger or malice, but with the serene, unstoppable purpose of white blood cells converging on a pathogen. They moved to embrace, to absorb, to gently pull the resistors into the waiting, welcoming arms of the Gestalt. Fighting them was a special kind of hell. It felt like murdering salvation. Rhi, the engineer, was forced to use her sonic wrench on a man who had taught her chess during the long voyage, sending him stumbling back with a cry that sounded more of static than pain. Finn lashed out with a concentrated herbicide spray, creating a choking cloud that made the advancing colonists recoil, their perfect skin blistering at the touch of the foreign chemical. They weren't trying to kill, they were trying to create a path to break the hypnotic rhythm just long enough to slip through. Every blocked grab, every diverted step, felt like a betrayal of the very people they were trying to save. Then the drones arrived. These were not the simple maintenance units they knew. They were sleek, predatory things grown from the same crystalline material as the core, their forms shifting and adapting as they moved. They didn't fire lasers or projectiles. They emitted a focused beam of the assimilation signal itself, a tangible wave of psychic energy that felt like having their minds scoured with sand. One beam caught Lyra, the young medic, square in the chest. She didn't scream, she just stopped, her weapon clattering to the floor, a beatific smile spreading across her face as the green filaments began to spiderweb through her irises. She turned not toward them but toward the heart of the core and walked away without a backward glance, joining the stream of the converted. The loss was silent, swift, and utterly chilling. It was Captain Vance who changed the calculus of their fight. He had been their reluctant guide, his own partially transformed body a testament to his long, losing battle. But seeing Lyra taken, seeing the cold, efficient purpose of the system he had served, something in him finally broke, or perhaps finally solidified. With a roar that was part anguish and part defiance, he turned his weapon away from the drones and toward the very structure of the facility itself. He fired concentrated plasma bursts into the glowing conduits that lined the ceiling, into the data crystalline growths that pulsed with stolen lives. The explosions weren't large, but they were strategically devastating. Conduits ruptured, spraying viscous, glowing fluid. The light in the corridor flickered and died, plunging them into a darkness broken only by emergency strobes and the angry red eyes of the drone. The psychic hum stuttered, the song faltering for a precious few seconds. The converted colonists froze in place, disoriented, their connection to the whole momentarily severed. "This is the only way," Vance bellowed over the shriek of alarms, his voice raw. "I held the line for a lie for centuries, now I hold it for the truth. Go while they're focused on me." He planted his feet at a narrow choke point in the corridor, a place where the drones could only come at him two at a time. He became a whirlwind of controlled violence, no longer the stoic commander but a man expiating a lifetime of guilt in one final, furious stand. The security detail, fully human and utterly loyal to their programming, rushed him. He took the first one down with a vicious blow to the throat, disarmed the second, and used the man's own weapon to blast a third. He wasn't just fighting, he was a dam holding back a flood, and he was cracking with every impact. Kaelen, Lyra, and the others didn't hesitate. They charged forward, scrambling over the faltering forms of the colonists through the choking smoke and the dying light. They could hear Vance behind them, the shouts of the guards, the sizzle of energy fire, and his own grunts of pain. They reached the final security door, a massive iris of interlocking crystalline shards that glowed with intricate, shifting patterns of light. It was the gateway to the planet's brainstem. Kaelen's fingers flew across his datapad, interfacing with the door's ancient, hardwired systems, searching for a backdoor, a flaw, anything. A blast of plasma shot past them, searing the wall. The guards were breaking through Vance's defense. They heard him cry out, a sound of pure agony, and then his voice rose again, not in pain, but in a final, thunderous shout that echoed down the corridor, a message meant for them, for himself, for everyone they had ever known. Change what we were meant to be. The shout seemed to hang in the air, a defiant counter-melody to the planet's song. And in that exact moment, Kaelen found it, not a backdoor, but a kill switch protocol buried in the original Elysium Dream schematics, a failsafe for a containment breach that had never been used. He slammed the command home. The iris did not slide open gracefully. It shuddered violently, the glowing patterns short-circuiting into a chaotic blaze of light before the entire mechanism screeched and froze, the shards retracting just enough to create a jagged, barely passable opening. They squeezed through into the heart of the machine, leaving the sounds of the final battle behind them, Vance's last stand becoming the foundation upon which their desperate, impossible plan would now be built. The air inside the core chamber was thick enough to drink, a heavy soup of ozone and psychic energy that made every breath a conscious effort. Before them, the heart of the machine revealed itself not as a cold, metallic console, but as a living, breathing nexus of light and crystal. A central spire, pulsing with the same rhythmic green luminescence they'd seen in the eyes of the lost, rose from the floor, its surface a complex tapestry of shifting, organic patterns that looked less like circuitry and more like a synaptic map of a billion fused minds. This was the terminal, this was the god they had come to hack. Kaelen stepped forward, his datapad whirring as it attempted to sync with the impossible architecture. The others formed a ragged perimeter around him, their weapons aimed not at the spire, but at the trembling, half-formed crystalline structures that began to push their way up from the floor around them, the planet's immune system finally manifesting in a physical, terrifying form. The air itself seemed to push back, the psychic hum intensifying into a focused, piercing tone that felt like needles driven directly into their temples. It was a voice without words, a command of pure feeling. Be still, be at peace, join us. Ignoring the agony, Kaelen jacked a hard line directly into a port that seemed to melt open to accept his connection. His screen flooded with a torrent of data so alien, so complex, it was like trying to read the thoughts of a star. It wasn't binary code, it was a flowing, living script of light and intent, a language built from emotion and memory. For a terrifying moment, he was lost, drowning in the vastness of it. He saw flashes of a million lives, the first colonists watching their children play under an alien sun, an engineer's final, panicked thought as the crystal embraced her, the profound, placid contentment of being part of the whole. It was all there, every joy and every fear, preserved but diluted like a single drop of ink in an ocean. His original plan, a brute force rewrite of the core directive, evaporated the moment he touched that ocean of consciousness. He couldn't just delete the command to assimilate. It was the planet's fundamental state of being, as intrinsic as gravity. To try and stop it would be like commanding a river to stop flowing. The despair was immediate and crushing. They had come all this way, sacrificed so much for an impossibility. But as he navigated deeper past the prime directive, he found something else. Subroutines, layers of programming that governed how the assimilation occurred. He saw the code that gently suppressed individual memory, the protocol that dissolved the ego to prevent integration shock, the systems that smoothed out the rough, beautiful edges of a singular human mind to make it a seamless, compliant part of the chorus. It was a recipe for erasure disguised as a lullaby, a new idea, both terrifying and brilliant, ignited in his mind. He couldn't stop the river, but he could change its course. He couldn't save their bodies from this transformation, but he might be able to save their selves. His fingers became a blur on the screen, no longer trying to fight the current, but to build a new channel for it. He began rewriting the subroutines. He located the code for memory suppression and inverted it, creating a firewall to protect individual experience instead of erase it. He found the ego dissolution protocol and patched it, programming it to strengthen the core identity, to make it a hardy, resilient stone in the river rather than sand. "It's not a prison we're building," he muttered, his voice strained with effort, more to himself than to the others. "It's an archive, a library. We can't stop the integration, but we don't have to be erased by it. We can be a part of the chorus without losing our own song. A shard of crystalline growth shot from the floor like a spear, aimed directly at his back. Lyra was there in an instant, deflecting it with a crack of her rifle stock, the impact vibrating up her arms. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." She yelled, her voice barely audible over the rising shriek of the planet's defensive systems. Kaelen's hands flew across the interface, weaving a new foundational layer into the planet's very operating system. He wasn't deleting the old code, he was grafting a new purpose onto it. The core directive remained assimilate, integrate, become one, but its outcome was fundamentally altered. Instead of dissolution, it would now be preservation. Instead of a silent chorus of identical notes, it would become a symphony of individual voices, forever distinct, forever aware, forever themselves, even as they were part of the infinite whole. He found the final command sequence, the execute function for his new code. He looked up from his screen, his face illuminated by the frantic, beautiful chaos of the data stream, his eyes meeting those of the few who had fought to stand with him in this awful, holy place. They saw not a technician but a maker, not a colonist but an architect of a new kind of soul. His voice when he spoke was clear and steady, a defiant counterpoint to the planet's screaming song. "We won't lose ourselves to become part of it." His thumb hovered over the final key. "We will become part of it, and we will remember who we are." And with a press that felt less like a keystroke and more like a covenant, he initiated the change. The effect was not an explosion, but a wave of perfect, profound silence that radiated outward from the core, a new song being born into the universe. The profound silence that followed Kaelen's command was not an absence of sound, but the birth of a new frequency. The piercing, aggressive hum that had sought to scrub their minds clean simply softened. The oppressive psychic pressure didn't vanish. It transformed, shifting from a crushing weight to a gentle, supportive presence, like the ocean finally learning to buoy a swimmer instead of drowning them. In the core chamber, the frantic, defensive growth of crystalline structures halted, the sharp shards retracting back into the floor as if in apology. The central spire's light, once a violent, rhythmic green, now pulsed with a softer, more complex pattern, weaving threads of gold and silver into its luminescence. The change was not just in the machine, it was in them. Lyra was the first to feel it. She had been braced for a fight, her mind a clenched fist against the planet's song. But as the new directive spread through the planetary network, the song didn't stop. Instead, it opened. The single, monotonous melody fractured into a million distinct harmonies. She heard a familiar, warm laugh that could only belong to Mara, the geologist, not as a memory, but as a living, present thought tinged with wonder. She felt Finn's sharp, analytical curiosity, a sensation like cool water, as he examined the new, non-hostile vine tendrils now gently curling around his boot. And then she heard her own name, not spoken aloud, but placed gently in her mind by Kaelen, a silent question of concern and awe that required no words to answer. Her own thought, clear and untainted, flowed back to him. "I'm here, I'm still me." This was the awakening. Across the settlement, in the forest, and deep within the facility itself, the colonists who had been subsumed into the placid chorus began to stir. The vacant, glowing green in their eyes didn't fade. It gained depth and focus, becoming a window rather than a wall. A man who had been methodically polishing the same section of a habitat module for days suddenly stopped, his hand trembling. He looked at his reflection in the gleaming surface, and for the first time since his assimilation, a single, clear memory surfaced. The feel of his daughter's hand in his on-launch day, her small fingers clinging to his. A tear, wholly his own, traced a path down his cheek, and the planetary consciousness around him didn't erase the grief. It held it, honored it, making it a part of the whole. He was not alone with his pain, he was sharing it, and in doing so, beginning to heal. Lyra reached out, not with her hand but with her mind, tentatively brushing against the consciousness of the colony. It was no longer a monolithic entity demanding conformity. It was a tapestry, and each thread was a vibrant, individual soul, now awake and aware within the weave. She could feel the shock of rediscovery, the joy of reconnection, the lingering confusion, and the dawning, staggering realization of what they had become. They were not separate from the planet. They were its nervous system, its senses, its heart. They could feel the deep, slow turn of its core, the photosynthesis of a leaf a continent away, the gentle pull of its two moons on the tides. They were individuals, yet profoundly connected, a society that communicated in a symphony of shared thought and emotion, where a lie was impossible and empathy was the fundamental state of being. She turned to Kaelen, her physical voice a whisper, but her mental voice a roar of triumphant clarity that echoed in the minds of every awakened colonist. "We're not being consumed," she marveled, the truth of it resonating through the very air. "We're becoming something new." It was a hybrid existence, a miracle of synthesis. They had transcended the brutal choice between lonely individuality and silent absorption. They were now singular drops of water that had become the ocean, yet each drop remembered perfectly the unique shape it held when it fell from the sky. They had not escaped the maze. They had become the architects of its beautiful, endless, and now conscious halls. The respite was a fragile thing, a moment of crystalline beauty suspended between the trauma of what they had been and the uncertainty of what they would become. For the first time since the cryopods had hissed open, there was no lie hanging over them. The air itself seemed clearer, the psychic hum of the planet no longer a threat but a comforting backdrop of shared presence, a symphony of a million individual minds now awake and aware within the whole. They were learning the new language of their existence, a communication built not on words but on the pure exchange of thought and emotion. A botanist's wonder at feeling the photosynthesis of a leaf could be instantly shared with an engineer who understood the precise physics of the light energy being converted, creating a moment of profound, collective understanding that was greater than the sum of its parts. It was a peace they had not thought possible. That peace was shattered by a new star blooming in their daytime sky. It was not the gentle emerald of their own world, but a hard, metallic silver, growing larger and brighter with terrifying speed. The sight was processed by 1,000 human eyes on the surface, and the data was instantly fed into the planetary network. 1,000 more sets of memories, drawn from the assimilated knowledge of the first colony's astronomers and the Odyssey's own crew, provided a chilling identification. It was a ship, but unlike their own vessel of hope and science. This was something leaner, sharper, and utterly devoid of any aesthetic that wasn't purely functional. It was a warship, and it was on a direct descent trajectory, a wave of cold dread, every bit as unified as their newfound joy, rippled through the collective. They didn't need to discuss it. The understanding was instantaneous. Earth's response to their unauthorized transmission, to their deviation from the script, had not been a rescue party. It was a clean-up crew. The term containment protocol took on a new, visceral meaning. The ship, designated Odysseus sanction, did not enter orbit. It positioned itself directly above the main settlement, a silent, predatory dagger hanging in the blue. Its communications were not a hail, but a broadcast, a powerful, narrow-band signal that blasted into their minds with the force of a physical blow. The voice was synthetic, devoid of any human inflection, the audio embodiment of the ship's brutal design. Colony Elysium-7. This is Commander Valerius of the Earth Containment Service. You are in violation of Project Longbow protocols. You will stand down all non-essential systems and prepare for immediate neural compliance scanning and re-assimilation. Any resistance will be met with orbital sterilization of the biosphere. You have 10 minutes to acknowledge. The threat was absolute. They would either be forcibly dragged back into the silent chorus, their hard-won individuality erased once more, or they would be burned from the face of the planet they had become a part of. The old fears of capture, of death, of losing themselves surged through the network, but this time the fear did not breed panic. It was met, steadied, and calmed by the immense, grounded presence of the planetary consciousness itself. The collective mind, a fusion of human sentience and planetary awareness, assessed the threat not with anger but with a profound, sad clarity. This was not an invader to be fought. It was a symptom of the same disease that had created this place, a pathological fear of the different, a need to control what it could not understand. As one, they turned their attention outward. They did not raise weapons, they did not power shields, they simply listened. A million minds focused not on the ship's armored hull or its powerful weapons, but on the minds of the crew inside. They could feel them 94 individual consciousnesses, each one walled off from the others, isolated in their duty, their thoughts a tight, anxious spiral of protocols and conditioned obedience. They were not monsters, they were prison guards, terrified of the very concept of the prison they had been sent to manage. Their response was not a transmission. It was a projection, a unified act of will from the entire world below. It bypassed the ship's communications array entirely, flowing directly into the minds of every soul aboard the Sanction. Commander Valerius was on his bridge, his finger hovering over the trigger that would unleash the first barrage of biocidal agents when the world outside his viewport vanished. One moment he was staring down at a lush green world. The next he was standing in his childhood bedroom on Earth, the air thick with the smell of rain on dry pavement, a smell he hadn't experienced in 30 years. He felt the rough texture of his old blanket in his hands, heard the distant, comforting sound of his mother's voice calling him for dinner. The memory was so vivid, so painfully real, that his breath caught in his throat. And then it was gone, replaced by the sterile, cold bridge of his ship. Across the vessel, every crew member experienced the same thing. An engineer found herself back in the academy, feeling the exhilarating fear of her first zero-gravity exam. A medic was suddenly holding his newborn daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers grasping his. For a single, universal second, the entire crew of the Sanction was reminded of who they were before the protocols, before the duty, before the fear. They were reminded of their own humanity, and then came the message. It was not a sound, but a knowing, placed gently and irrevocably into the core of their consciousness. It carried the combined weight of every colonist's memory, the hope of the launch, the terror of the discovery, the pain of loss, the joy of awakening, and the profound, unwavering certainty of their new existence. It was a story, and it was a verdict, and woven through it all were two simple, devastating sentences. We are not your failure, we are your future. On the bridge, warning klaxons began to shriek. The main power core, a marvel of military engineering, didn't explode. It simply went quiet. The intricate dance of energies that powered the weapons, the life support, the thrusters, simply unraveled, as if the very laws of physics had decided to politely decline participation. Systems 1 through 20 switched to emergency backup power, and then those failed too, not with a bang but with a sigh. The Sanction was dead in the sky, a floating tombstone for a paradigm of fear that had just become obsolete. The final message from the planet below was the softest yet, a whisper that echoed in the silent, dark corridors of the paralyzed warship. You cannot contain what you do not understand. And you will not understand by destroying. The door is open, but the choice to walk through it must be yours. The transmission ended. Below, the world continued to turn, its green continents and blue oceans achingly beautiful, its silence more powerful than any threat. The Sanction hung motionless, its crew left in the dark with only the echo of their own memories and the terrifying, liberating offer of a choice they had never expected to have to make. The silence from the derelict warship stretched for 3 full days, a tense pause where the fate of 2 worlds hung suspended between the stars. Inside the Sanction, the crew worked in a quiet frenzy, their isolation now a tangible prison. They had power for life support and basic comms, but their weapons and engines were so deeply fused into the planet's crystalline latticework that they were less a ship and more a bizarre floating geode. They could send a distress call, but to what end? To summon another, larger warship to witness their failure and likely share their fate. The choice offered by the planet below was not a threat, but a profoundly unsettling mirror. It was Commander Valerius who finally broke the stalemate, his voice stripped of its former authority, crackling over a standard, unsecured frequency. Elysium-7, this is Valerius. We are incapacitated. Our directive remains, but our capability to enforce it is null. State your terms. The message was short, defeated, and utterly unprecedented in the annals of Earth's military command. The response did not come from a single person. It was a voice, but it was a chorus, synthesizing the calm wisdom of their oldest members with the sharp, analytical clarity of their scientists, all filtered through the vast, patient intelligence of the planetary network. Commander Valerius, we have no terms for your surrender because we are not at war. You are our guests. Your ship's systems are currently being analyzed and understood by our combined consciousness. We believe we can safely disengage them from our planetary matrix and restore your power, but we will not do so until a new understanding is reached. On the main view screen of the Sanction, the image of the planet below shifted. The view zoomed in, not on a city or a landing site, but on a vast, desolate region of the northern continent that their initial scans had classified as a barren wasteland of unstable mineral deposits. As they watched, the very geology of the area began to change. The ground itself seemed to flow like liquid, toxic heavy metals separating out and sinking deep into the mantle, while rich, loamy soil welled up to replace it. Then a wave of green swept across the landscape so fast it looked like a time-lapse video, but this was happening in real time. Forests of complex, adaptive flora sprang from the earth, their roots digging deep to stabilize the bedrock, their canopies forming instantly to begin processing the atmosphere. A river, previously choked with industrial runoff from the first colony's long-abandoned mining attempts, ran suddenly clear, its water pure enough to drink. In the span of 10 minutes, they witnessed the complete and total ecological repair of a landscape that would have taken Earth's best terraforming engineers a century to even begin. The chorus spoke again, its tone not boastful but matter-of-fact, as a teacher might explain a simple equation. The environmental collapse you face on Earth is not a mystery to us. It is a problem of fractured systems, of a biology forced into conflict with itself. Our existence here is a proof of concept. The same planetary consciousness that you sought to use as a tool for control is, in its pure form, the ultimate tool for harmony and restoration. We can feel the sickness of your world from here, Commander. Its fever is a discordant note in the music of this sector. We do not wish to hear it suffer. Valerius could only stare, his strategic mind, trained for combat and contingency, completely failing to process what he was seeing. This was not a weapon. It was a miracle, and it was being offered by the very people he had been sent to exterminate. "What are you proposing?" he asked, his voice hushed. It was then that Kaelen's voice became the primary vessel for the collective, his familiar timbre anchoring the unbelievable offer in something recognizably human. "We're proposing a partnership, Commander, but not the kind Earth is used to. You can't buy this, you can't command it, you can only earn it through trust. We will share our knowledge. We will show you how to heal your world, to rebalance its ecosystems, to cleanse its oceans and its air. We can teach you to listen to its song as we listen to ours." He paused, and the collective will of his entire civilization hardened his tone into something unyielding. "But we will do it on our terms. There will be no more ships of war. No more attempts to control or harvest this consciousness. you will receive a delegation of our choosing, and they will be accorded full diplomatic immunity. They will operate with complete autonomy. The knowledge we grant will be given freely, but it will not be weaponized, patented, or hoarded by corporate or government interests. It will belong to all of humanity, administered through open channels that we will help you create. To emphasize the point, the view on the screen shifted again, this time showing a live satellite feed of Earth itself. Then the image focused on a single, massive oceanic garbage patch, a swirling vortex of plastic and waste. As the crew of the Sanction watched, the very composition of the plastic began to break down at a molecular level, unraveling into harmless organic compounds that were swiftly consumed by a newly evolved airborne microbe that sparkled like diamond dust in the sunlight. The patch didn't just get smaller, it vanished, and the water beneath it shifted from a sickly gray to a vibrant, healthy blue. "The old way is over," Kaelen said, his voice the final word on the matter. "You came here to enforce a contract written in fear. We are offering you a new covenant written in hope. You can return to Earth with a failure, or you can return with its future. The choice, as always, remains yours." The transmission ended, leaving the crew of the Sanction in the silent, humming dark, staring at the image of their healed home world, faced with an offer that felt less like a negotiation and more like a first step toward absolution. The departure of the Sanction left behind a silence that was different from any before. It wasn't the quiet of secrecy or the hush of fear, but the profound, breathing stillness of a world finally at peace with itself. In the weeks and months that followed, the colony of Elysium-7 didn't just rebuild. It was reborn, its purpose and identity fundamentally rewoven into the very fabric of the living planet they now called home. They were no longer a corporate asset or a failed experiment. They became a sovereign entity, a new chapter in the story of consciousness, and they chose a new name to mark the beginning, the Elysian Accord. This sovereignty wasn't declared with proclamations or enforced with borders. It was simply a state of being, recognized by Earth not through a treaty but through a series of quiet, data-rich exchanges. The Accord transmitted the core principles of their existence, the schematics for atmospheric purifiers modeled on their own planetary processes, the genetic sequences for microbes that could digest petrochemical waste, the blueprints for energy systems that harmonized with a world's natural magnetic field rather than exploiting it. They sent these gifts freely, without patent or restriction, but with one non-negotiable condition: the knowledge was to be used for healing, not for power. There would be no more warships sent to their system. Any further contact would be through a designated civilian diplomatic channel. Earth, reeling and desperate, its own biosphere groaning under the weight of centuries of abuse, had no choice but to accept. The relationship was no longer one of master and subject, but of a patient and a distant, enigmatic healer. On the surface, life took on a rhythm that was both utterly alien and deeply familiar. The colonists, the awakened, as they now called themselves, no longer lived on the planet, but with it. Their homes were grown, not built, living structures of woven wood and crystalline that shifted and breathed with the seasons. Their work was not labor, but a form of attentive caretaking, a gentle guidance of the planet's immense power. They didn't command the weather, but they could feel a storm's formation days in advance and gently coax its path to avoid a delicate new growth zone. They didn't farm, but they could encourage a specific, nutrient-rich tuber to flourish in a particular valley, its location and need appearing in their shared awareness like a gentle request. One evening, Lyra found herself standing on a high ridge overlooking the valley where they had first landed. The scars of their arrival were gone, seamlessly integrated into the lush, thriving landscape. Below, she could see the soft, golden light of the settlement, a warm glow against the deepening violet of the twilight sky. In her mind, she could feel the quiet contentment of her people, the intricate web of their individual thoughts and feelings intertwined with the slow, patient thoughts of the world itself. She felt Kaelen's presence beside her before she heard his footsteps, his mind a familiar, steady pulse of curiosity and calm within the chorus. He didn't need to speak aloud. His thought reached her, clear and warm. "It's quieter than I expected it to be." Lyra smiled, not turning her head. "It's not quiet," she replied mentally, the concept flowing between them. "It's full. It's the difference between an empty room and a room where everyone is content, so there's no need to fill the space with noise." She looked out at the impossible beauty they had fought so hard to save, a beauty that was now a part of them in a way they could never have imagined. "They told us a lie to create a perfect, silent colony," she said, her physical voice a soft murmur in the evening air, giving weight to the reflection. "They wanted prisoners in a paradise, minds emptied out to serve a purpose they would never understand." She paused, feeling the truth of it resonate through her entire being. The lie created prisoners, but the truth, she gestured to the world around them, to the mental symphony of a million unique perspectives existing in perfect, aware harmony. The truth created something entirely new. They were not a colony anymore. They were a testament. They were the guardians of their world, and the guardians of the brutal, beautiful truth that sometimes salvation doesn't look like a rescue. Sometimes it looks like a choice, and sometimes the only way to find a new beginning is to be willing to become something else entirely. The air on the ridge was different now, cleaner, richer, carrying the subtle scent of blooming night flowers and the cool, clean breath of the living forest. 1 year, it felt like a lifetime and the blink of an eye all at once. Below Kaelen, the valley where they had crashed, fought, and despaired was now cradling the gentle, radiant glow of a city that was not built but grown. Spires of living crystal and woven biolattice spiraled toward the twin moons, pulsing with a soft, internal light that mirrored the rhythm of the planet's own heartbeat. Pathways glowed with a soft amber light, not laid upon the ground but emerging from it, as if the very soil had decided to offer its own guidance. This was not the sterile, prefabricated colony they had been promised. This was a symphony in stone and light, a physical manifestation of the Accord's new existence. He could feel the city's presence in his mind, not as a noisy chatter, but as a warm, humming undercurrent, a vast, interconnected network of thoughts, emotions, and experiences, each one unique, each one cherished, all contributing to the beautiful, complex whole. He felt Lyra's focused attention as she worked with a team to gently guide a new waterway through the eastern forest, her satisfaction a warm pulse in the network. He felt the quiet awe of a former security officer, now a master gardener, as he felt the first seeds of an Earth origin tomato, a precious relic from the ship's archives, sprout in the alien soil, their tiny roots greeted and supported by the planet's own microbial symphony. They were no longer colonists or even awakened. They were citizens of a new world in every sense of the word. A subtle chime, both auditory and mental, echoed in his awareness. An incoming transmission routed through the old facility's comms array, which they now maintained as a single, monitored channel to Earth. The signature was not military. It was from the newly formed Earth Reclamation Council, a body of scientists and engineers, its authority fragile and desperately hopeful. He accepted the link. The face that appeared on his datapad was etched with a weariness that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation. It was the deep, structural fatigue of a species watching its home die. "Citizen Kaelen of the Elysian Accord," the woman began, her voice respectful but strained. "We have reviewed the atmospheric data you provided. The models aren't there beyond our current comprehension, but our initial implementations show promise. A 0.01% drop in atmospheric particulates in the test zones." She took a shaky breath, her professionalism cracking to reveal the raw need beneath. "But it's not enough. The feedback loops are accelerating. We are losing ground. Our counsel is we are requesting direct assistance, your guidance, your understanding of the planetary systems we are trying to emulate. We need your help." There was no threat in her words, no hidden agenda. only a profound, humbling acknowledgement of failure and a plea for the very thing they had once tried to exterminate. Kaelen looked out at his world, at the city that had grown from a lie into a testament of what was possible when life worked in concert instead of conflict. He felt the answer rise within him, not as his own thought, but as a consensus that flowed seamlessly from the collective, a truth they had all earned. His voice was calm, carrying the weight of their hard-won peace. "We hear your need," he said, "and we will send a team. They will bring the knowledge you seek. They will show you how to listen to your world's song, to understand its pain not as a problem to be solved, but as a cry for balance." He paused, letting the significance of the moment settle. This was the final, absolute rejection of their original programming. But understand this, we help you not because we were created to serve, or because we are compelled by some hidden directive. We help because we choose to, because the choice to preserve life in all its fragile, beautiful forms is the highest expression of what we have become. Closing the channel, he felt the truth of those words resonate through the network, a wave of affirming warmth from every single consciousness on the planet. His purpose here was complete. The last bridge to the past had been crossed, not with a weapon but with an offer of peace. A deep, tranquil stillness settled over him. He closed his eyes, not to shut out the world, but to see it fully. He let his individual awareness, the singular perspective of Kaelen, gently expand. The boundary between his mind and the planetary network, once a line he had fought so fiercely to maintain, now softened like a river merging with the sea. His thoughts became one with the slow turn of the seasons, with the deep geological dreams of the planet's core, with the joy of a newborn creature taking its first breath in the western forests. He was not erased, he was enhanced. Every memory, every fear, every triumph that made him Kaelen was not lost. It was added to the infinite library of the whole, a unique and cherished note in the everlasting symphony. The fear was finally gone, replaced by a peace so profound and complete it felt like coming home after a journey that had spanned the